she shielded her student from gunfire, not knowing the little girl was a Mafia boss's daughter. High above in the quiet halls of the academy, Alara walked briskly, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She carried her students, notebooks in one hand and a sense of unease in her heart. Something about the storm felt different tonight, heavier, like the city itself was holding its breath. Her eyes scanned the corridor as she called the students for the evening class. Among them, she noticed Leela, a small girl with dark eyes that seemed older than her age. Leela always seemed to observe more than she spoke. Alara had noticed it the first day she met her. The girl's gaze could make a person feel both exposed and understood. "Leela, please stay close," Alara said gently, seeing the girl lag behind. Leela nodded silently and picked up her pace, her ponytail swinging behind her. The academy had strict rules, but Alara always let her students explore the small courtyard before nightfall. The garden had old stone statues, twisted trees, and fountains that reflected the moonlight. Tonight, however, the air felt different. The birds were silent, and the usual chatter of children was replaced by a tense hush. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the quiet. A gunshot echoed through the courtyard. Alara's heart leapt into her throat. She grabbed Leela's arm and pulled her down just as more shots rang out. Chaos erupted. Students screamed and scattered in all directions, their small bodies vanishing behind columns and bushes. Alara didn't think. Her mind stopped and her body acted. She threw herself in front of Leela, shielding her small body from danger. A bullet tore through the air, striking Alara in the shoulder. Pain shot through her, hot and burning, but she held her ground. "Run!" "Now," she shouted to the others. Some obeyed, some froze in fear. Leela clutched Alara's hand, wide-eyed, as if seeing the teacher in a completely new light. There was a strange calm in the girl's expression, almost like she had expected this. The masked gunmen advanced, their movements deliberate and cold. Alara could hear their boots splash in the puddles, smell the rain mixing with gunpowder, and feel the weight of every heartbeat. She noticed something unusual, a faint glimmer around Leela. It was as if the air itself obeyed the girl, bending slightly, holding the danger at bay for a moment longer. Alara's breath was ragged. She could feel her strength fading, but she could not let go. Not now, not ever. Leela's small hand squeezed hers, silent, yet filled with an urgency that demanded attention. There was a strange magnetism about the girl, something powerful and commanding, even though she looked fragile. A third shot rang out, closer this time. Alara's shoulder screamed with pain, but she kept Leela pressed behind her. She could see the fear on the faces of the other students, and she knew she had to act fast. Her mind raced. She grabbed a nearby stone fountain and used it as a shield. The attackers paused for a second, eyes narrowing. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Alara noticed Leela's gaze, unwavering, unafraid. "You'll be safe," Alara whispered almost to herself. "I promise." But safety was an illusion. One of the gunmen raised his weapon again. Alara tensed, ready to take the next hit. Suddenly, a loud screech of brakes echoed nearby, startling the attackers. A black car skidded to a halt at the edge of the courtyard. Two tall figures stepped out, cloaked in long coats that fluttered in the wind. They moved with precision as if choreographed. The gunmen hesitated and Alara used the chance. She dragged Leela behind the fountain and whispered, "Stay down and do not move." Leela obeyed, her small face hidden behind the stone. Her eyes never left Alara's, full of trust and something unspoken. The attackers shouted orders, their voices cutting through the rain. Alara gritted her teeth, trying to push the pain away. She realized that the courtyard was no longer just a place of learning, it was a battlefield. And in the middle of it all, a small girl held a power that no one yet understood. The new figures advanced, weapons drawn. In a blur, they disarmed the masked attackers with precise movements, neutralizing the threat almost effortlessly. Alara's vision blurred with relief and exhaustion. The rain ran down her face, mixing with blood and sweat. She had protected her student, but the cost was high. Once the attackers were restrained, the figures turned to Alara. One of them knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her shoulder to stem the bleeding. "She's lucky to have you," the stranger said quietly. Alara barely nodded, her strength draining. Leela crawled out from behind the fountain, brushing wet hair from her face. She looked at Alara with wide, curious eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. But there was something in her tone, something older, deeper, that made Alara pause. It was not just gratitude, it was a promise, or maybe a warning. Alara managed a weak smile. "You're safe now, that's all that matters." The rain continued to fall as the city lights shimmered across the wet stones. Alara knew the night was far from over. Someone had sent those gunmen and someone had aimed directly at Leela. Questions swirled in her mind. Why was Leela targeted? Who could want her harmed? And why did the girl seem so strangely powerful? Leela's hand found hers again, small and firm. "I'll repay you," the girl said quietly, "but not in ways you can imagine." Her words were soft, but they carried a weight that made Alara shiver. She had no idea what Leela meant, but she felt it in her bones. This was only the beginning of something far larger and more dangerous than she could see. As paramedics arrived and took Alara away, the students were ushered into safety. Alara's mind raced with images of gunmen, shadows, and the rain-soaked courtyard. She thought of Leela, of her calm, almost fearless gaze, and she wondered what secrets the girl carried, secrets that could change everything. The city continued to pulse around them, alive and watching. And somewhere in the shadows, a figure observed, hidden but deliberate, taking note of who had acted and who had survived. The streets whispered promises of danger and power, and Alara felt it settle in her chest like a dark flame. Leela stood alone in the courtyard for a moment, watching the ambulance disappear. Then she whispered to the rain, almost to herself, "I'll repay you, but not in ways you can imagine." Her eyes glimmered with something older than fear, older than childhood, something dangerous, something commanding. Alara lay in the ambulance, her mind half-conscious from pain and adrenaline. She did not know that the night's events would mark the first step into a world she had never imagined, a world of power, fear, loyalty, and secrets. And she did not yet know that the small girl she had saved was not just a student. She was something far more dangerous and extraordinary. The rain fell, soft and endless, as the city whispered in neon and shadow. And in that quiet, lingering moment, Alara felt a pull she could not explain, a connection that was both terrifying and magnetic. The night had only begun, and already everything had changed. Alara woke to a quiet room, the smell of antiseptic sharp in her nose. Her shoulder throbbed, but she was alive. Sunlight pierced the curtains, painting streaks across the walls. The world felt smaller here, safe, and yet distant. Outside, the city continued its constant hum of life. Raindrops still glimmered on the streets, neon signs blinking softly, but everything felt different now. She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. A nurse appeared, helping her back into the bed. "You've been through a lot, Miss Alara," she said gently. "You should rest. Your students, they are safe." Alara nodded weakly, but her mind was already elsewhere. Leela. The girl had stayed calm during the attack, as if she knew exactly what would happen. There was something in her, something beyond normal childhood courage. And now, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that saving her was only the first step into a larger, darker world. A soft knock on the door startled her. She turned to see Leela standing there, her small frame framed in the sunlight. She looked almost delicate, but there was a quiet authority in her eyes that made Alara pause. "You shouldn't have put yourself in danger," Leela said softly, stepping inside. Her voice carried weight even in its softness. "I couldn't let them hurt you," Alara replied, her voice firm despite the lingering pain. "You were my student, I couldn't." Leela studied her, tilting her head. "You saved me," she said. And now you belong to my world whether you want it or not. Elara blinked, confused. Your world? What do you mean? The girl's eyes darkened with something ancient and sharp. I am not just a student. I am the daughter of someone very powerful, someone people fear. Someone who controls much of what you see outside these walls. The words landed like stones in Elara's chest. She had heard of powerful families, of crime and control, but she had never imagined one hiding behind the face of a child. I don't understand, Elara whispered, trying to steady her voice. You will, Leela said simply, soon enough. That evening, after Elara had insisted on moving despite her injuries, she was escorted by two of Leela's guardians to a place she had never seen, a grand mansion hidden on the outskirts of the city. The gates were tall, wrought iron, and the courtyard was filled with statues of creatures that seemed alive under the flickering light. It was beautiful, terrifying, and unfamiliar all at once. Inside, she saw a world she could never have imagined. Velvet curtains, polished marble floors, and hallways lined with portraits of people she did not know. It was a palace built not just for luxury but for control, a place where power was displayed and respected. Leela walked beside her, small yet commanding, her eyes scanning the room as though it belonged to her. Elara couldn't help but notice the subtle deference everyone showed her, the quiet bow of heads, the careful steps around her. They fear me? Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leela smiled faintly, almost cruelly. Some do, others respect me, and some wish they were me. But you saved me. That makes you different. That makes you important. The weight of the words pressed on Elara's chest. She was no longer simply a teacher. She had been pulled into a world of power and danger, a world that demanded loyalty, cunning, and courage. Over the next days, Elara began to see Leela in a new light. The girl was not childish in her decisions. She planned, observed, and predicted moves with an intelligence far beyond her years. Meetings with advisors, whispers of city politics, and warnings about rival families filled their days. Leela's life was a chessboard, and she moved pieces with precision. Elara found herself drawn to the girl, both fascinated and afraid. She struggled to reconcile the child she had once shielded with the young ruler she now saw. And as she spent more time in Leela's world, she realized that danger was everywhere, even in the smiles of those who claimed loyalty. One evening, as they overlooked the city from a balcony, the rain returning in a soft drizzle, Elara asked, "Why did you stay so calm when the attack happened? You didn't even seem afraid." Leela's eyes glimmered, reflecting the lights below. "Fear is a tool," she said. "Use it too much and it controls you. Use it carefully and it can guide you. I've learned to control it and others too." Elara shivered. There was truth in her words, a cold, hard truth. And she realized that the girl's power was not just in her family or money. It was in her mind, her presence, and the way she could command even the strongest to follow her. As the days passed, tension built between them. Elara tried to remain cautious, aware of the girl's dangerous influence, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt. There was a strange comfort in Leela's presence, an understanding that spoke across unspoken boundaries. And Leela, for her part, seemed to test Elara constantly, observing her reactions, learning how far she could push without breaking the teacher's resolve. One night, a sudden scream echoed through the mansion. Elara raced toward the sound, heart pounding, only to find one of Leela's trusted advisors collapsed in the hallway. A note lay beside him, warning of betrayal. Elara's stomach twisted with fear. This world was not safe. Not for her, not for Leela, and perhaps not for anyone. Leela appeared beside her silently. "They will try again," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "And when they do, you must be ready. You belong here now, Elara. You cannot turn back." The words were both a warning and a command. Elara felt the weight of them pressing down, heavier than any storm she had ever faced. She realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a teacher. She was a guardian, a participant, and perhaps even a partner in the dangerous world that Leela ruled with quiet authority. As they stood together, watching the city lights flicker in the rain, Alara felt the pull of something she could not name. She was drawn to Leela, to her strength, her mystery, and her undeniable command. And she knew, deep down, that this connection would shape both their fates in ways neither could foresee. That night, as Alara prepared to rest, Leela approached her room once more. She held a small, intricately carved box in her hands. "This is for you," she said, placing it on the table. "It is a promise and a warning. Keep it safe." Alara opened the box and found a simple pendant, delicate yet powerful in its design. Something about it made her chest tighten. She looked up at Leela, who was already half hidden in the shadows of the doorway. "Why give me this?" she asked softly. "Because," Leela said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "our lives are now bound. And soon the city will demand we stand together or fall apart." Alara stared at the girl, understanding the weight of the words but not yet their full meaning. She felt the tension coil in her chest, a mix of fear, anticipation, and something deeper she could not name. The night stretched on, heavy with possibilities, danger, and unspoken desire. As she lay in bed, staring at the pendant, she realized that the city outside was no longer the same. The rain fell endlessly, the neon signs reflected on wet streets, and somewhere in the shadows, enemies waited. The world had shifted, and she had no choice but to move with it. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the mansion, Leela watched her, eyes gleaming. She had pulled Alara into her world, and now there was no turning back. The city's dangers, her enemies, and her own power would test them both. And in that testing, something unexpected, something human, fragile, and yet impossible to resist, was beginning to grow between them. The rain tapped against the windows, steady and persistent, like a heartbeat. And as the city whispered threats and promises alike, Alara understood one undeniable truth. The night had only just begun, and the real danger was yet to come. The city was cloaked in darkness, the rain a steady curtain that blurred lights and shadows. Alara stood at the balcony of the mansion, watching the streets below. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her. She had entered Leela's world as a teacher, a guardian, and now she felt like a participant in a dangerous game that stretched far beyond anything she had ever known. Inside, the mansion was alive with whispers and movement. Leela moved through it with quiet grace, her small frame commanding attention at every turn. Advisors, guards, and allies seemed to orbit her presence, careful not to disturb the balance she maintained. But tonight, there was a tension in the air that Alara could not ignore. A message had arrived earlier, carried by one of Leela's trusted messengers. A rival faction had planned an attack, a coup meant to seize control of the empire while exploiting the girl's youth. Alara's heart tightened as she read it. She knew the danger now was no longer abstract. It was immediate, real, and deadly. Leela appeared beside her, eyes reflecting the storm outside. "They will strike tonight," she said quietly. "We cannot hide, we must act." Alara nodded, trying to steady the fear that rose in her chest. She had faced danger before, but nothing like this. And yet, she could not abandon the girl she had saved, the girl who had become so much more than a student in just a few days. The mansion descended into careful preparation. Guards took their positions, and allies sharpened their strategies. Leela stood at the center, orchestrating movements with a confidence that belied her youth. Alara watched, amazed, and slightly afraid of the power that seemed to radiate from her small charge. "Stay close," Leela said, her voice calm but firm. "Trust no one but yourself and me." Alara followed her, heart pounding. She had learned over these days that Leela's words were never empty. Every command, every glance carried weight, and now they would test them both. The night deepened. Thunder rolled in the distance as shadows moved along the perimeter. Leela led Alara to a side entrance, one that allowed them to observe without being seen. From there, They watched as masked figures crept toward the mansion. Ilara's pulse quickened. She had never seen such a coordinated force. It was clear the rival faction had prepared carefully, underestimating nothing. Leela's hand brushed against hers briefly, almost instinctively. The gesture was small, yet it carried a reassurance that steadied her racing heart. They moved as one, silent and deliberate, shadows within shadows. The attackers breached the outer defenses, and the mansion erupted into chaos. Ilara fought alongside Leela's guardians, moving with precise timing, her training and courage guiding her. Every step, every movement was a test of her resolve and loyalty. She realized that her protection of Leela had evolved into something far deeper, a bond forged in danger, trust, and unspoken understanding. Leela remained at the center, issuing orders calmly, directing allies with clarity and authority. Despite the storm and the fear, her presence seemed to command the room. Ilara could not help but admire her courage, her intelligence, and the quiet power that drew everyone toward her. As the battle continued, a masked figure broke through, aiming directly for Leela. Ilara's instincts took over. She threw herself forward, intercepting the attack. The force knocked her to the ground, but she pushed through the pain, using every ounce of strength to shield the girl she had sworn to protect. "You are stronger than I imagined," Leela said, her voice steady even in the midst of chaos. "And braver." Ilara looked up at her, catching the spark of admiration and trust in her eyes. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of mutual reliance, of connection, of a bond forged in fire and danger. Together, they fought through the night. Leela's strategy, Ilara's courage, and the loyalty of the Guardians turned the tide. The attackers, powerful and prepared as they were, could not match the combined force of intelligence, bravery, and trust. When the final threat was subdued, the mansion stood, scarred but undefeated. The storm outside began to ease, the first light of dawn brushing the city in soft gold and silver. Ilara leaned against a marble column, exhausted but alive. Leela approached her, small steps that carried authority and purpose. "You saved me again," Leela said softly, "and now you've saved yourself too." Ilara looked at her, unsure what the girl meant. Leela smiled faintly, placing a hand on hers. "We are bound now," she said. "Not by choice, but by fate, and in this world, fate is stronger than fear." Ilara felt the truth of those words settle in her chest. She had entered Leela's world as a guardian, and she had emerged not just as protector but as companion, as ally, and perhaps as something even deeper. She realized that fear had transformed into courage, and courage into trust. The mansion was quiet once more, the echoes of battle fading into memory. Yet the bond between teacher and student, guardian and leader, had grown into something unbreakable. They had faced danger together, and in doing so had reshaped the path of both their lives. As they stood together, overlooking the city now bathed in dawn light, Ilara realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm they had faced within themselves. The city below, full of shadows and whispers, would continue to challenge them. But for the first time she felt prepared. Leela turned to her, eyes bright and unwavering. "There will be more challenges," she said. "The city, my enemies, even fate itself will test us, but we will face them, together." Ilara nodded, her heart steady. She had come to understand that the bond they shared was not simply about protection or loyalty. It was about understanding, trust, and the courage to face the unknown together. And in that bond, she found a strength she had never known she possessed. For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the city awaken beneath the soft morning light. The rain had ceased, leaving the streets glimmering, alive with possibility. And though danger still lingered in the shadows, they faced it with a newfound resolve. Leela's hand brushed against Ilara's once more, small and yet charged with significance. "We are ready," she whispered. "The city may challenge us, but it cannot break us. Not now, not ever." Alara felt the weight of those words and the promise they carried. She had saved Leela once, and now, together, they had saved each other in a way that neither had expected. The lessons of fear, courage, and trust had been written not in words but in action, in shared danger, and in the quiet moments between chaos and calm. The dawn continued to rise, painting the city in colors of hope and renewal. Alara knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that threats and shadows would continue to test them. But she also knew that with Leela, she was no longer just a teacher. She was a partner, a guardian, and a witness to something extraordinary, an emerging power, a bond forged in danger, and a connection that promised to endure. And somewhere in the heart of the city, the shadows waited. But Alara no longer felt fear. She felt readiness, courage, and the quiet certainty that they would face whatever came together. The night had ended, but their story, one of trust, power, and unspoken loyalty, was only beginning. The pendant Leela had given her glimmered in the early light, a symbol of the bond they shared. Alara held it gently, feeling the weight of their journey and the promise of the future. And as the city whispered its endless stories below, she knew one truth above all. They had survived the storm, and together they would shape the destiny that awaited them.